The internet is decreasing in privacy and increasing in utility. Under some conditions, this trade-off makes sense. We publicize our profile photos so that people know what we look like. Under other conditions, this trade-off does not make sense. We do not want a television that costs less to purchase because it is silently recording all of the conversations that take place in the room and selling them to the highest bidder. The example of the TV that records everything you say just because it's cheaper, which is actually a real thing. This product actually exists. Samsung makes it. I have a link in the show notes. But this illustrates a trade-off of the internet. The advertising industry pushes towards lower marginal costs for the products and services in exchange for less privacy. Someday we will live in a world where it will be easy for consumers to control the dial on the trade-off between privacy and the price of the services that they get from the internet. Until then, we have almost zero control over what information the advertising surveillance industrial complex knows about us. Bill Budington is a security engineer with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. In today's episode, Bill describes some of the current techniques used by the advertising industry to track your activity through the web. Bill works on encryption tools as well as Panopticlick, a project that allows users to see what trackers they are vulnerable to. Software Engineering Daily is having our third meetup, and I hope you're able to attend. It's Wednesday, May 3rd at Galvanize in San Francisco. The theme of this meetup is fraud and risk in software. We're going to have great food, we're going to have engaging speakers, and there's always a friendly, intellectual atmosphere. To find out more, go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/meetup. Software engineers know that saving time means saving money. Save time on your accounting solution. Use FreshBooks cloud accounting software. FreshBooks makes easy accounting software with a friendly UI that transforms how entrepreneurs and small business owners deal with the day-to-day paperwork. Get ready for the simplest way to be more productive and organized, and most importantly, get paid quickly. FreshBooks is not only easy to use, it's also packed full of powerful features. From the visually appealing dashboard, you can see outstanding revenue, spending, reports, a notification center, and action items at a glance. Create and send invoices in less than 30 seconds. Set up online payments with just a couple clicks. Your clients can pay by credit card straight from their invoice. And if you send an invoice, you can see when the client has received and opened that invoice. FreshBooks is also known for award-winning customer service, and a real live person usually answers the phone in 3 rings or less. FreshBooks is offering a 30-day unrestricted free trial to Software Engineering Daily listeners. To claim it, just go to freshbooks.com/SED and enter Software Engineering Daily in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Again, that's freshbooks.com/SED. Thanks to FreshBooks for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Bill Budington is a security engineer with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Bill, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We had a previous show about web tracking, and that was with someone from Ghostery. In that show, we covered the basic engineering concepts of web tracking. In this episode, I'd like to explore web tracking more deeply and talk about some of the subjective decisions around tracking. You work at the EFF, that means that your opinions will be less filtered than someone who works at a corporation. And we will get into net neutrality because that's been in the news lately, and I'm sure you have some thoughts on it. Let's start with web tracking. What is wrong with the way that users are tracked on the web today?
Well, so if we go back to 1998, you have the situation where users were being tracked, but they were being tracked in a kind of transparent way via cookies. They can use the normal mechanisms within their browsers to actually just flush those cookies out and have a fresh start. Ever since then, we've been seeing more and more pernicious and underhanded ways that trackers and advertisers have used technologies of the web to track users. One particularly pernicious thing that trackers are doing is they're using the fingerprint of your browser. This is a kind of a combination of web headers and JavaScript detected properties from your browser that you can use to kind of get a unique signature of what your browser looks like. Other technologies have been used, such as evercookies. Evercookies are this way that you can have a collusion between the cookies that are stored in your browser and those that are stored in something like Flash or Silverlight or Java plugins. And so what evercookies do is, if you delete cookies in, say, Flash and Silverlight, then Java code can be used to propagate the cookies back to the Flash and Silverlight add-ons. So basically, it's very kind of underhanded. It's subverting the normal mechanisms that users are used to, kind of, deleting their cookies or, using private browsing mode. But for fingerprinting, for instance, you can't do that. You can't actually be assured that you won't be tracked just because you're using private browsing mode.
There are a bunch of these companies who track me through the internet where I'm not aware of these companies. I'm not aware of giving them any sort of permission to track me. What does the law say about consent?
There's no real data protection regime for users within the US. There are laws on the books in Europe, but those don't apply here. And so when you are browsing the web, there's no real way for you to be sure that you're not being tracked unless you install add-ons and employ technologies that make sure that you're protected. So, for instance, one of the things that we develop here at EFF is an add-on called Privacy Badger. And that'll kind of give you a good indication of when you're being tracked. But unfortunately, there's no real way to know whether the remote site that you're accessing is just delivering that data to third parties behind the scenes via special deals or whatever relationship they might have with trackers. So yeah, a lot of the companies are pretty sneaky about what they're doing, and they're not, sites that you might have heard of. You might have heard of Add This because they are added on a lot of websites to share different, to share articles on your social networks. But, things like Ligatus or Silverpush are companies that you don't necessarily know about. And behind the scenes, there are trackers that are gathering your data and using that to figure out what sites that you've been on, and more broadly, your browsing habits.
When people talk about tracking, I think they're usually thinking of it in terms of something has been put on their browser to track them from the browser's point of view, and that browser information gets sent back to the company that's tracking them. But you also just described a type of tracking where if I log into beefrecipes.com, beefrecipes.com is tracking that user session or logging that user session, whatever terminology you want to use, and then they might share that with some external broker or somebody who wants to sell me ads directly. So there's multiple types of web tracking that we could be talking about.
Yeah, and by far the most common form of web tracking is via third-party inclusion of scripts or fonts or some kind of resource that's loaded on a web page that isn't actually a part of directly of the site that you're accessing. In a recent study by the Center for Information Technologies at Policy at Princeton, has found that the majority, or basically the largest amount of trackers are loaded on news sites. And so news sites are, including a bunch of scripts from trackers that you don't, when you're going to NewYorkTimes.com, it's not New York Times tracking you. It's the inclusion of third-party scripts that are tracking you. And that might be fonts. It might just be directly advertising. So advertisers are a big way that third parties are included in news sites, and often they're keeping tabs on what kind of information you're accessing. And additionally, it's one of the impediments to actually news sites adopting HTTPS is that, they can't adopt HTTPS because ads are only loaded on insecure sites. And if they're dependent on ad revenue, then, unless their ad servers are also supporting HTTPS, then the ads won't actually load because of something called mixed content blocking. So basically, you have the situation where even if news sites or sites that are including third-party trackers want to move to HTTPS, they actually can't. So the problem with tracking is kind of related to the problem of encryption in general.
At Software Engineering Daily, we need to keep our metrics reliable. If a botnet started listening to all of our episodes and we had nothing to stop it, our statistics would be corrupted. We would have no way to know whether a listen came from a bot or from a real user. That's why we use Encapsula to stop attackers and improve performance. When a listener makes a request to play an episode of Software Engineering Daily, Encapsula checks that request before it reaches our servers and filters bot traffic, preventing it from ever reaching us. Botnets and DDoS attacks are not just a threat to podcasts. They can impact your application too. Encapsula can protect your API servers and your microservices from responding to unwanted requests. To try Encapsula for yourself, go to encapsula.com/sedaily and get a month of Encapsula for free. Encapsula's API gives you control over the security and performance of your application, whether you have a complex microservices architecture or a WordPress site like Software Engineering Daily. Encapsula has a global network of over 30 data centers that optimize routing and cache your content. The same network of data centers that is filtering your content for attackers is operating as a CDN and speeding up your application. To try Encapsula today, go to encapsula.com/sedaily and check it out. Thanks again, Encapsula. We had Brendan Eich on the show recently, and he talked about the state of JavaScript, which he created, and he talked about his new browser that he's working on, Brave. One of the examples he gave of the brokenness of the advertising ecosystem is the New York Times having malware being delivered through their ad network. Basically, display ads that were served to users caused malware directly or linked to malware. I think that's the extreme example. There's plenty of things in between malware and a clean ad experience that are different shades of annoying or threatening or privacy encroaching. It's no surprise that brands, I should say, are moving to Facebook, where it's more of a walled garden, Twitter, where it's more of a walled garden, moving more of their dollars to Google, who clearly from the recent YouTube advertisements on extremist videos, Google doesn't have a great handle on things, but they've probably got a better handle on things than the average ad delivery service. Talk about the incentives of the giant companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and how they handle web tracking.
Yeah, so Google acquired DoubleClick a little while ago, and I think this has incentivized them to care less about privacy than they obviously do about security. Google has a world-class security team. And because of that, the dangers of Google ads, I presume, are decreased. If there's an ad network out there that's delivering malware with their ads, then I suspect that they have less protections than Google Ads and DoubleClick does. There might be idiosyncrasies in the business model that Google employs, but by and large, Google takes that into consideration very well. One of the things that is lacking behind is privacy, and this is indicated by the fact that, and this will kind of dovetail into talking about Panopticlick, where their browser is very unique. And so you can actually tell via these different properties that are included in Chrome browser that like exactly what that browser looks like and has very uniquely identifiable properties when users are using it. Not to say that something like Firefox doesn't, but Firefox is moving in a direction that kind of precludes a lot of the worst tracking mechanisms. For instance, what Firefox started to do in their private browsing mode is employ tracking protection, and it includes a list that has been cultivated by an add-on disconnect and uses that as a way to block malicious trackers. And this is not something that is currently in incognito mode for Chrome. So I think that we need to have Google do better in terms of privacy. They're already doing, a world-class, spectacular job in terms of security, but privacy is something that they're unfortunately less and less concerned about. And I think this, is basically a example of, or a result of their business model becoming more and more reliant on advertising in general.
Your concerns with privacy have led you to working on Panopticlick. Panopticlick lets a user diagnose how much non-consensual web tracking is occurring on their browser. Panopticlick is named after, as far as I know, the Panopticon, which is a building design that allows for all of the people in the building to be observed without knowing whether they are being watched. The Panopticon was originally designed for, I think, insane asylums and prisons, and it evokes something chilling because people who don't know whether they are being observed or not at any given time, there's a chilling effect that happens to their behavior because they won't act as freely. Generally, human behavior suggests that. So why is Panopticlick named after the Panopticon? And what does Panopticlick do?
So Panopticlick measures these unique properties of your browser, and it's basically a volunteer-driven data project. We wanted to get an idea of how unique people's browsers were using fingerprinting techniques, using this kind of unique combination of browser headers and JavaScript detected properties. And so when we launched Panopticlick, it was an effort not only to see how unique people's browsers were, but also to give them a good understanding of how unique their own browsers were. And it does this by combining a bunch of different unique facts. So for instance, we measure the user agent that's delivered upon every request in combination with the language that the user is delivering, in combination with the content types that your browser supports, in combination with the fonts that might be detected via font fingerprinting or other more advanced techniques. And so what happens is there are, what's called in information theory bits of entropy, which you can gather via techniques that we employ on Panopticlick. And once we gather these unique bits of information, you can combine those to get a clearer picture of what the user's browser looks like. So it's not just, one property, but it's the combination of all these properties that you can use to get that unique picture. And we measure that, and we also provide a result of, hey, this is the, only time that we've ever seen a browser with these properties, which is actually most of the time. The vast majority of the time, users' browsers are uniquely fingerprintable. And, or you have some protections against this, and we can give that result depending on how your browser measures up against other browsers that we've seen in the past.
We'll talk more about the engineering in a sec, but I would like to know, why is it called Panopticlick?
It's just a way to basically, we thought it was a good analogy to the original Panopticon developed by Jeremy Bentham. This was something that was meant to observe the movements of prisoners and their behaviors as they went about their daily business in the prison. And so we thought this was a great analogy for what trackers are attempting to do, to see users' browsing habits, see what they're looking at, how they behave as they traverse the web. And it's really like the scary part about it is that the totality of the observation of these different, in the case of the Panopticlick, Panopticon, it was the prisoners, but the ubiquity and omnipresence of trackers on the web has really, really increased. In the late 90s, it was only 5% of web pages that included trackers. And now it's, the vast majority. I think it's about 85% or so. I can get that figure for you. We can add that.
Well,
but,
you don't have to convince me of the totality, because the Panopticon model, where you have this building that is structured such that there are little observation panels into every room, that would seem innocent compared to what we have today, or the future that we are asymptoting towards, where you have smart TVs that you can't even tell if they're on. You have Google Home sitting on your desk, and I don't know if you have one or if you've used one, but it is such an effective utility. I use it. I probably use it 40 times a day, 30 times a day, and I don't want to start to cast aspersions, because I know it's, I know that Google would dispute me on this, but I swear there are, and it could just be my phone doing this, but I swear there are times where I say something and minutes later I get served an ad, and there should be no way for the internet to know that I want that thing, other than if they were recording what I said. Like, I don't know. Has that ever happened to you?
I haven't had that experience myself. I don't use Google Home. But the problem with these technologies is that it's really opaque what they're doing. So when you say, well, I won't say what the keyword is because maybe your listeners will have that ordered for them, but like, get me a dollhouse, which was actually said on a program in San Diego, and everyone's home assistants actually ordered them a dollhouse because it was said on the program. When you say that kind of thing, you don't know where that data is going, what's being done with it. It's not transparent. So we have no idea what they're doing with our data once it's actually delivered to the remote servers. We do know that it's not being processed on our local devices. We know that it's being delivered to the cloud, and we know we can be pretty well assured that they're doing something involving advertising with that data, because these are big data driven advertising driven companies. That's how they get their revenue. But we can't actually know what's happening. behind the scenes. And that's really scary. We have this kind of situation where our data is leaking all the time. And most people kind of think that this is just to give us, better advertising. One recent NPR story talked of a woman who was looking up alcohol abuse counseling online. And minutes later, she had the local liquor store being advertised to her. And so, is that a form of better advertising? Maybe it is. I mean, from the perspective of the liquor store, that does get them more business because this is someone who is more likely to buy alcohol because they're addicted to it. And so, this isn't like a side effect. It's the intended purpose of these advertising. So, another very pernicious example of this is described in a recent book by Kathy O'Neill, which is called Weapons of Math Destruction. Talks about these diploma mills and how those that are kind of lumped into a category of low-income users on the web because of their browsing habits are advertised universities that the diploma for which you get from them isn't really worth the paper that it's printed on. And the people that are getting advertised these diploma mills don't have the level of social access to know that this is going to not help them in life. And so these algorithms aren't just providing me better advertising, they're actually providing a social ill. And that's something that I think is lost on a lot of people, that they don't know that it's just, they think it's just better advertising for me so that I'll get products that I want. But it's, coming more and more reaching into more deeply entrenched position in our society. It's actually kind of becoming part of the social fabric in a lot of ways.
When I go to the Panopticlick website, I run these tests against my browser. Describe more what is going on when I'm running those tests.
Sure. So in the classical Panopticlick, what we had happen was basically every time your browser accesses a website, it delivers these little text fields called headers. And those happen no matter if you have JavaScript turned off or turned on or whatever. There's always going to be web headers that are delivered to a website that you access by your browser. In addition, we read, if you had JavaScript turned on, we employed techniques that would basically figure out certain things about your browser in a more unique way or intimate way. So we would try to enumerate the fonts that you have installed, try to see what plugins you had installed, if any. Now we have, the number of touch points that your device is advertising. And, there are a bunch of different JavaScript detected properties that you can actually determine based on a user's browser. And so we kind of look at those and see how many, for each of these, how many other users have had the same result. And we use a formula that is derived from basic information theory to give you a quantified result of what exactly how much bits of entropy or uniqueness that you have for any one of these categories. And also we provide a summation of all of these combined, how unique you are. Since the version 2 of Panopticlick, which was launched in December of 2015, we've also included a number of other tests. these tests aren't about fingerprinting. They're about how well you're protected from third-party trackers. And so we employ a tracker blocker detection test. The way that we do this is kind of interesting. So there are trackers that there are tracker blockers that block trackers in any number of ways. The three most common are based on URL fragments. So if your URL path looks like it's a tracking beacon, say like it has something like add_server equals in the URL, then that looks like an advertiser, or like, tracker_ID equals, then that looks like a tracker. Most of them aren't that obvious, but so those are using URL fragments. Other blockers use blacklists to determine which servers are actually requesting tracking information from your browser. And for Privacy Badger, for instance, we employ a heuristic approach. So we determine what third parties are setting cookies and which of them look like trackers based on their behavior. So for each three of these categories, Panopticlick mimics trackers, and we have a number of domains that we've set up that look a lot like trackers. So if your tracking blocking is working properly, then those domains will actually be blocked after we've finished the test. If it's not configured correctly or it's turned off, then those domains won't be blocked. And so across three of these third-party domains, we kind of can get a good sense of how well your tracker blocker is working, and then we display a result based on that. We also have results that indicate whether your browser is complying with our do not track policy, which I can get into. Basically, there is this initiative at EFF to have trackers promise not to and actually provide a privacy policy which is actionable not to track users. And so if an ad tech company, is not tracking users, then they can actually post this very well-defined document that stipulates the ways in which they are not tracking users behind some well-known location in their domain, behind their web root, basically. And so this means that once you are accessing ads from that site, then you can be assured that they're not actually tracking you in some deep way or some unknown way, that they're just providing those ads. And we don't want to block them. So once they provide this policy, and post this on their site, this is an indication that we can actually serve their content with Privacy Badger. So the second test is to basically tell whether this is a third test, is to tell whether your browser is allowing those resources, because we know that they're not tracking you.
Yes, and I executed this test on myself, and I only got a green check mark for the one that I was running an ad blocker. So I guess I have some work to do. I recommend everybody else who's listening to check out Panopticlick and try it out for themselves to get a better understanding of what is going on in terms of tracking through their browser. I want to talk about net neutrality. I want to talk about EFF's position on net neutrality and your personal position. I would love to talk more about Panopticlick too, but I wanted to get into these other topics because it's fairly topical right now. The FCC has changed its standards on net neutrality in the last couple days. Explain what these changes mean for corporations and for users.
So the stipulations on the FCC that basically say that broadband providers can't just fork over your data to the highest bidder, or that that they can't, for instance, modify traffic in real time. There's pretty good regulations that have been enacted. They were enacted last year, and this, under the new FCC chairman, this is really kind of being revoked in a very, very alarming way. So what we see is we've seen a big push by the broadband providers to actually make sure that they can view your traffic, advertise to you, put tracking beacons in your traffic, and do all sorts of things that they had been doing. They don't have a very good track record of protecting users' privacy, unfortunately, but that they have been doing and were told to stop. So usually this comes in the form of unencrypted traffic being able to be picked up, and they can insert ads, they can use their privileged position on your network path to see exactly what you're accessing and to provide targeted advertising or monetize your user data. And so that's something that we've been very vociferously fighting against in the last few weeks. So yeah, that's pretty much the kind of long and short of what has been going on. As far as I understand, the latest, and I'm not sure if this will change by the time you broadcast, but the latest is that this has passed both houses of Congress, and it is going to sit before President Trump's desk. Hopefully, the very privacy centric and anti big business, anti drain the swamp crowd can come out in full force and say, hey, look, if you want to drain the swamp, then there's a way to do it, and it's to not sign this into law, to actually stand up for Americans and make sure that this isn't just a sell-off of users' data. Actually put something into law that makes it so that their rights are protected rather than rescinded.
But it sounds like what you're saying is that even regardless of where this legislation went, we would pretty much be in the same situation regardless, because these policies are pretty hard to enforce. Obviously we would rather have policies that were navigating us towards a world that enforces consumer privacy, but it sounds like what you're saying is that in effect these policies were not being policed.
And the FCC often lacks the enforcement mechanisms to make it so that so that companies will actually have real protections. I mean, this isn't always the case. I mean, so in very particular circumstances, federal regulators have stepped in and made sure that advertising companies can't do the worst abuses of the past that they've been found to be doing. So not the FCC, but the FTC was issuing letters to to applications which included this Silverpush SDK. Silverpush is a company that basically does inaudible tracking beacons emitted from your TV to link your devices up. It's a technology called cross-device tracking. And last year, the FTC, and basically if an app has the Silverpush SDK installed, and it's installed on your phone or on your tablet or whatever, and it's in the same room as an advertisement which is played from your TV, which has a an audio beacon that isn't audible. That's basically too high of a pitch for the human ear to pick up, but your device can still listen to that. And so Silverpush is a company that was basically providing this technology to advertisers to give more, to kind of link your devices in that room and make sure that there's a picture of who you are based on numerous of your devices, not just your TV. So the FTC last year actually bit them, and apps that had a Silverpush SDK included in their code were given a harsh warning. We don't know which apps they were because the letter didn't indicate which apps were actually doing this, but they were given a harsh warning about, hey, you might be in violation of the law if you continue to do this type of tracking. And this is like one of the kind of things which is, on the bleeding edge of what tracking means, right? Like, this is something, linking your devices up between them and using behavioral fingerprinting to tell when a user has switched browsers based on their unique typing patterns. Things like that used to be the world of science fiction, and increasingly it's becoming a reality as trackers become smarter and smarter. Unfortunately, there's not a good data protection regime in the US to protect users against the worst of these abuses. And in the last few weeks, we've seen that the carriers and the broadband providers are given more license to track users and to insert targeted advertising in the traffic stream. There are technologies, and the only way for users to protect themselves is to use technologies that we can provide to prevent these abuses from happening. I mean, at the EFF, we fight for the best in the legislative world, so that we fight against the worst kind of abuses happening. We fought against the repeal of the FCC protections, and will continue to do so. One of the big things that users can do is to install software such as Privacy Badger, such as HTTPS Everywhere, which is a software project that I maintain, and we've developed here at EFF, such as downloading the Tor browser as well. I mean, one of the great things about the Tor browser is that it has, the Tor browser and the folks that are developing it have put a lot of effort into making sure that you're anonymous when you use it. And so it makes, when you use Panopticlick with Tor browser, it gives you a very, very good result in terms of fingerprintability, because the Tor browser puts you in a pool of users that pretty much all look the same. Everyone using the Tor browser looks very, very similar, if not the same. So there are good protection mechanisms that users can themselves install on their machines to make sure that they're not suffering the worst abuses of trackers.
Spring is a season of growth and change. Have you been thinking you'd be happier at a new job? If you're dreaming about a new job and have been waiting for the right time to make a move, go to hired.com/sedaily today. Hired makes finding work enjoyable. Hired uses an algorithmic job matching tool in combination with a talent advocate who will walk you through the process of finding a better job. Maybe you want more flexible hours, or more money, or remote work. Maybe you want to work at Zillow, or Squarespace, or Postmates, or some of the other top technology companies that are desperately looking for engineers on Hired. You and your skills are in high demand. You listen to a software engineering podcast in your spare time, so you're clearly passionate about technology. Check out hired.com/sedaily to get a special offer for Software Engineering Daily listeners. a $600 signing bonus from Hired when you find that great job that gives you the respect and the salary that you deserve as a talented engineer. I love Hired because it puts you in charge. Go to hired.com/sedaily, and thanks to Hired for being a continued, long-running sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. It seems inevitable that our meat space world is colliding with this violent and widespread use of tracking and retargeting and poorly designed advertising experiences. It seems like this collision is occurring faster than the advertising ecosystem is improving. I mean, you're starting to see information come out into the public eye about ad fraud and advertising malware, and I mean, I've been doing so many shows about it, so maybe I'm biased, but in any case, it seems like this intersection is happening too fast for certainly any kind of government regulation that I can imagine in the near future inhibiting it. To the contrary, government seems to prefer to piggyback on it and use it as a tool for surveillance. Okay, we're already surveilling you because we're already incentivized to Google or name your sketchy ad tech company is incentivized to track you. NSA says, well, that's convenient for us. We'll just piggyback on that and track you to make sure that you're not a terrorist. So at this point, I have kind of personally made my peace with this world that we're moving towards. I hope it is, I hope there are different shades of privacy depending on where in meat space I am. Maybe I have to have a part of my house that has no computers in it, and it's got walls that are insulated in certain ways to prevent electronic stuff from, maybe that's my bedroom. But philosophically, what are the social norms that we need to deal with this new world, given that the panopticon is going to be everywhere and it's increasingly feeling inevitable?
I think that you touched on a really interesting point, which is that this isn't black or white. There are gradations, and you can have some privacy without having total privacy all the time. So, for instance, you can envision having a browser that you have a slider on it, and you basically, if you want total protection, then that comes at a cost of functionality of the web, right? So, like, if I want to play video games in my browser and have real-time chats over the web, then that is enabling functionality that alternatively can be used to track me. But that doesn't mean that I have to enable that on every single site that I visit. We can, kind of envision a world where there are different gradations of, okay, I want this site to be able to enable these feature-rich web technologies. But, this site over here is just, news. I don't necessarily need everything that can be used to track me enabled on my browser. I think that, this is mostly a problem of user education. When users aren't aware of the fact that they can be tracked, in every single aspect of their lives, then they don't get angry about it. They don't have any incentive to think of anything better. So one of the big things that we try to do at EFF is to have user education happen. We give, these training sessions on how to better protect yourself, but also to have users be aware of the risks. I think that there are things that you can do and kind of build into your common habits that are maybe a step in the right direction. So if you have an Amazon Echo, for instance, you don't need that device listening all the time. There's a mute button that you can have. I mean, there's a mute button on the device that you can press and it won't listen all the time. Yeah, maybe that's a sacrifice for usability, but it also comes with the assurance that your every word isn't being uploaded to the cloud, or that a hacker can't come along and find a vulnerability in the Amazon Echo and use it as a remote listening device. So that's something that users can do, and that only comes with user education when users know that the Echo is listening for that, trigger word. That means that it's listening all the time for that trigger word. So, I think that that's something that can be done on an everyday level for users. What is something that requires more engineering is for us to be assured that our products have some kind of a hardware switch, that they can't listen to us if we flip this hardware switch, right? Like if the Amazon Echo, for instance, had disconnected the circuit to the microphone, if I had a button in a certain, that actually does that disconnects that circuit. These are things that are hardware requirements that we should demand that companies actually build into products in order to give good privacy guarantees. But I think that that's not going to happen unless users know the risks. So that's the first step, to get users aware of what the risks are so that they can better protect themselves in the short term and demand better privacy in the hardware controls and in the privacy policies and in the way that these companies behave in the long term.
Okay, Bill. Well, thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily. It's been great talking to you. It's always nice to talk to the EFF folks. I've already done a couple shows with different EFF people, and it's always a pleasant conversation because you guys are removed, or I shouldn't say you guys, your team is removed from the censorious trappings of corporations or governments.
Yeah, I mean, we work with them too. I mean, they're concerned about how they are perceived in the world. They want their users to be protected, and they don't want bad media. And so we often consult with these corporations and try to make their products better and try to advise them on how they can be better. And sometimes it's a matter of, them actually being pernicious or them not wanting to take user considerations into their worldview. But more often it's just that they don't know what their devices are capable of. They kind of want to develop a product and have it be cool and put it out to the world. But sometimes that does ill to the world if it actually can cause problems and actually impacts people's security or privacy. And it's not always, the fault of the companies that they want to create a cool thing and have it be delivered to the users. Sometimes they just kind of need that reminder that some of the stuff that they're developing could be used for harm.
Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks again to Symphono for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily for almost a year now. Your continued support allows us to deliver this content to the listeners on a regular basis.
Wow!